welcome to episode 35 of Book Writing Tips, quick tips for new and seasoned authors, and I am your host, Alba Arango. In today's episode, I want to talk about something that I think is actually really important to your story, and that is how to write a really great antagonist and or villain. Now, it doesn't matter how great your main character is, if the antagonist is flat or isn't very interesting or doesn't have a lot of key elements, then your story isn't going to be as interesting as it really could be. So with no further ado, let's get to it. Let's talk villains. Alrighty then, today's episode will be in two parts as always. In part one, I want to talk about some suggestions about writing a great antagonist. Now, this does not necessarily have to be the villain. This could just be the person that is in conflict or opposed to your main character. They don't have to be a dastardly dude, someone really terrible, or someone who's actually bent on taking over the world, but an actual antagonist to your protagonist. And then in part two, let's get down and dirty and talk about a real villain. What are some key characteristics that make villains really stand out and great? All right, let's get to it. Part one, the antagonist. And here is a disclaimer. I am talking about an actual human antagonist, or at least a sentient antagonist, because you can have antagonists that aren't like human or that aren't like any kind of a sentient being. So for example, if your story is a deep one and it surrounds about a girl who's, battling cancer and all the things she wants to do on her bucket list before she dies, then the antagonist really in that story is time. And that's not at all what I'm going to be talking about today. So if that is your kind of story, I don't actually have suggestions for how to really make that antagonist a better antagonist. So I am literally going to be focusing on like a human or a sentient being that is actually going to be like someone who counters your protagonist in the story. So let's talk about an antagonist. So the antagonist that's not a villain. Now this could be someone who's like the one who is competing for your love interest. Your main character has a love interest. Maybe it's her boyfriend, and now there's this ex-fiancé who's in the picture and is trying to steal him back. Or it could be, someone who is competing for that same job position that your main character is really, hoping for. She's been working at this law firm for a really long time, and now, she's got the chance of a promotion, and whoop, there we go. There's the person who is her competition to get there. That would be her antagonist in the story, most likely. And that's what I want to talk about for part one. How do you make that character a really great character? Well, first of all, pretty early on in the story, you need to establish what your antagonist's motivation is. Like, what is it that they really want? Well, they want to, steal your boyfriend back, or they want to, butt you out of the job and get that promotion themselves. What is their motivation? And that should be made pretty clear to the reader really up front. But I want to delve a little bit deeper. Later on in the story, and I do think you're talking, I'm talking like, halfway through the story, maybe even a little more halfway to the story, I want you to explore and kind of give the reader some insight into what is the reason behind their motivation. Yes, they want to steal their fiance back from you or their ex-fiance back from you, but why? What is their underlying reason? And this is a great opportunity for you to make that antagonist human. Give them something that the reader can kind of empathize with, because whenever a reader has empathy for the antagonist, and this is going to be really true about the villain as well, then your reader feels much more connected to the story because they can kind of see the antagonist's point of view. So if the reason for wanting to get this, fiance back is because, this person has always felt like they never really achieved something that they wanted. And this love interest was the one thing they thought they were really succeeding at. And now, that they've lost them, they feel like they have failed at that one thing. So if they could just get that one thing back, then that would make it right. Or, they're bucking for this job. Well, what if they're, the boss's son, and you're like, oh no, well now the antagonist is like, the sort of legacy thing going, or they've got, the in because they're the boss's son. And why do they want this job? Why is it important to them? Do they need to look good in the eyes of their dad? Do they need to not fail at this one thing because they have failed at so many other ventures before? Or what is it that is the motivation for that antagonist? And I think if you kind of leak that out later in the story, then you can garner some empathy for the antagonist. And I think you'll make that character just so much more believable and human to your readers. Now, the other thing I do want to say about an antagonist is they need to be a real threat to your main character or your protagonist. Like, don't just be like, well, it's, the maid has this big crush on, her, and she's always trying to disrupt things. Is the maid a real threat? I mean, is there sparks between the maid and your main character's love interest, or is it really more just like of a side character? If it's really more just like a side character and comic relief, then keep the maid in there, but get a real antagonist that is worthy of this great main character that you've developed. That's what you want. You've created this amazing main character. Well, your antagonist needs to be equally amazing, because there needs to be a level of competition, and that needs to be fair ground. They need to be on the same level. So if you're going to make your protagonist worthy of being read in this story, then you need to make your antagonist equally as worthy of being read. Now, a lot of this carries over into talking about a villain. But before I get to villains, it's time for your crazy law / writing prompt. Those of you who are new, every week I give you a crazy law. And this is a law that once upon a time was a real law in history. And your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to write a short story based on this law. And it's really just a way of getting you to flex your writing muscles. You write something outside of your work in progress, just kind of give you a little bit of a break. So here we go. This week's crazy law. In Georgia, it is against the law to open an umbrella in front of a mule. There you go. Now's your chance to write a story as to why they felt they needed to make that a law. But all right, let's get down to it. Let's get down and dirty and talk about villains. What makes villains great villains? Now, I have a quote, and I don't even know if it's the exact quote, and I don't know who to attribute it to. So if you know who to attribute it to, great. You can go ahead and, put that down in the comments. But the quote is, don't write a villain, write a person. And I just think that is the best advice that anyone can give you about writing a great villain, is that they need to be human. They need to have humanity. If you make them so dark that they are just completely unlikable and just despicable, then you're not really creating a villain that is worthy of your antagonist. Because if your antagonist is a great person, well, they are flawed. And that's one of the things I know I've talked about before, is adding flaws to your protagonist makes them human, makes them relatable, makes them that. But you need to do the same for your villains. You need to give them elements of humanity, elements of empathy that your reader can kind of like draw parallels to, that make them relatable to your reader. So first of all, I want to say your villain believes they are the hero of the story. Like, they believe what they are doing is right, that they're doing the right thing. So that needs to be kind of woven throughout your story, that there are reasons why your villain believes this to be true. And, you've got to think of like Thanos in, Avengers. And, he wants to literally wipe out half the planet's population. That's despicable. That's terrible. And then as you hear his, reasoning for it, you're like, wow. I mean, you get it. Of course, you're not rooting for him, but you kind of get it. And that's what you want. You want a villain that people kind of see as relatable, which means that the motivation for this villain needs to be something believable. They're not just trying to take over the world for the sake of taking over the world. What is their underlying reason for wanting to take over the world? Is it so that there are no more wars? So they've got this, heroic idea that if there is one ruler and everything is under that one ruler, then there would never be wars again. And maybe, they grew up in Afghanistan, or they grew up in a place where there was a war-torn country, and their dream is to just eliminate that for all the children of the world. Well, that's a kind of a noble motivation. They're going about it the wrong way, but that makes your character believable. That makes your villain relatable. And that is one of the things you really, really want. Now, a couple other suggestions is that your villain should be pursuing his goals throughout the entire book, even when they're not directly in conflict with your protagonist. So it's not like your villain only shows up when your protagonist is there. They need to be doing stuff that is getting them towards their goal that has nothing to do with your protagonist. So that, suddenly, oh my gosh, he's robbing this bank over here, and your protagonist finds out about it. I mean, he hadn't planned on your protagonist finding out about it. He just planned to rob that bank. I mean, he's doing stuff, or she is doing stuff that is not related to your protagonist. And, it might be kind of cool if you, again, in the whole giving your villain some kind of relatability, give them a hobby. Give them something that, people can relate to. Like, they're robbing a bank. Oh, but they love that piece of art. So they're going to take that piece of art because they're an art collector. Give them something. I don't know. They love to play golf. So everywhere they go, they leave a golf ball as their, calling card. Give them something that is unique and relatable to them that people can kind of, hey, yeah, I get that, because that's what you want. You want the reader to see, of course, your main character as this great hero, but to see the villain as this great villain, worthy of this great character you have written. And one last thing I will talk about, because I've already talked about, giving them elements of empathy and humanity, which is probably the most important thing I could say. But one last thing, there needs to be some kind of connection between your antagonist or your villain and your protagonist. Something connects them. And maybe it's something from the past. It could have just been passing them on the street, but something connects them because you want your protagonist to kind of feel sort of these inward conflict when thinking about the villain, because there's something there. They're connected in some way. And that is a great way to not only show character development for your protagonist, but as a way to really keep the reader involved, because they want to know, how deep does this connection go? And, can the villain sway your main character in some way? Or can your main character sway the villain? Or is it just impossible? Is that connection severed? So these are things for you to think about when you are writing your villain to make them more interesting to your reader. You've already created this great protagonist. Now you need to spend the same amount of time that you did developing this great protagonist into developing your antagonist/villain, because that is the person that is opposing your main character. And do be sure to give them a lot of conflict, because that conflict is what keeps the readers interested in turning the page. So there you go. These are just some suggestions. There's so many more. You can find all kinds of great things online about rating great villains. Just remember, keep them human. Give them elements of humanity so that your reader finds them relatable. All right. If you have enjoyed this, please, please, please hit that like button. I drop new episodes every Wednesday, and this is Christmas week. So if you celebrate, I hope you will have an enjoyable, wonderful Christmas, and I will see you all next week for New Year's Eve. God bless. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you later.